When the sun has set on a Friday night, bringing peace into your home, families will gather all around singing Shabbat Shalom. Everybody sing Shalom, Shalom. Shalom, shalom. A gift from God to put a smile upon your face. He's got the whole world in his hands, so obey his commands and you will know peace. Shalom, shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Good evening, my friends. Shabbat Shalom. My name is Rabbi Ron Goldberg here on the Eisenberg Village campus. And as always, we're joined by our friend, Rabbi Karen Binder. Good evening. Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So good to see you all.
It is great to be here for Shabbat together yet again. And what better way to welcome in Shabbat than with a song?
I hope everyone will join us in this song for peace. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu. Shalom, Yahaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahaseh Shalom, Yahaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahaseh Shalom, Yahaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahaseh Shalom, Yahaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. As we all know, yesterday was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Rabbi Binder and I we're both in Poland, weren't we, for March of the Living? And
yes.
my big takeaway from that and from the observance yesterday, I'm going to borrow the words of Ernie Bronstein of blessed memory, the past president of my campus's Shoah Survivors group. His message to me constantly was, let what happened not be forgotten. Let what happened not be forgotten.
That's beautiful, Rabbi Ron. And what I find profound about the International Holocaust Memorial Day that we marked yesterday is that it exists at all. In other words, the Jewish people, we have our own Yom HaShoah, our day of Holocaust remembrance and of heroism that comes every spring. But this is the world's observance of Holocaust Memorial, which is important because we want not only for ourselves to remember so as to not repeat history, but we want the world to never forget as well. And that is what we talk about when we mean let's be a light unto the darkness, right? And so as we light our Shabbat candles and make our way out of Holocaust Memorial and into the celebration of Shabbat, let's all ask ourselves, how can we bring light? Even when there's darkness, how can we be a source of illumination and joy? So I'm going to light the lights and ask you to join me in the blessing. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, Shel Shabbat, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, vetzivanu lehadlik ner, vetzivanu lehadlik ner, vetzivanu lehadlik ner, Shel Shabbat.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Let's enjoy Shabbat with some sweet wine so we can enjoy the sweetness of the day. My friends, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho, v'va'u v'ratzon hinchilanu, zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila l'mikra'e kodesh, zecher litziat mitzrayim, kivanu v'acharta, ve'otanu kidashta, mikol hamim, ve'shabbat kodshecha, ve'ahava uvratzon, hinchaltanu, baruch atah Adonai, Nekadesh HaShabbat.
Amen. L'chaim.
I am. Rabbi Binder, an easy question. Do you prefer your challah sweet or savory, like with za'atar or something like that on it, or with raisins and craisins in it?
Good question. I like my challah plain. I really do. And then what I like to put on the challah is a decadent amount of margarine, like an amount that's so great that it should be illegal.
Wow. So like when you have enough, double it, basically.
Pretty much. And also in my family, we've got the crusters and we've got the tunnel diggers.
Oh.
So, and there's a perfect balance, thankfully. Some of our residents might know the word krychik. That's the corner of the challah. My father is entitled to all of the krychiks. And then the rest of us dig a tunnel because we like the inside soft part. What about you, Rabbi Ron?
My wife loves the crust. A good crust is heaven sent in her eyes. I like the fluffy interior with the raisins. I like sweet. And instead of margarine, I like an insane amount of silan, the date syrup, the date honey.
Interesting.
Love that. My decadent treat for the week.
Very international of you, Rabbi Ron.
Oh yeah, we have a Shabbat should be enjoyed, right?
Very international. Yes, I'm so impressed by the sophistication.
Oh yeah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen. B'te'avon. And I know that we're all going to be eating dinner later, but we remember the blessing from now in our hearts. And later, when you sit down to dinner, you can say amen, and it will count for you too. You can even say amen now. So let's turn our attention, everyone, to a little bit of learning of the Torah portion of the week, which happens to be one of my favorite Torah portions. Rabbi Ron and I were talking about it the other day. I said, I love Mishpatim. Mishpatim means rules or laws or sentences. And, that sounds cold or overly legalistic. But in fact, this Torah portion is a handbook of inspiration on how to be a mensch. And there are only a few places like this in the Torah with so much material guiding us on how to be a good citizen and a good person. Obviously, the 10 Commandments, right? And naturally, the Holiness Code, which is Leviticus chapter 19, which lays out a bunch of of rules and laws and inspirational phrases about how to be a mensch. But then there's this Torah portion, and it is so full of commandments worth cherishing that Rabbi Ron and I had to be selective about, well, how much can we really share with you? So we decided to focus on a few of our very, very favorite verses. And Rabbi Ron is going to go first.
So my first choice is kind of two pasukim in the same two sentences we're going to put together. Exodus 20, chapter 22, verses 20 and 21. Do not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers once in the land of Egypt. Do not mistreat the widow or the orphan, and if you do, I will hear their cry. So God says to the children of Israel. And I love this, the idea that they were commanded, we're given a very specific injunction of what not to do to the most vulnerable classes in society, the people who don't necessarily have a champion to speak up for them. We're told specifically, don't oppress them. Don't oppress the stranger in your midst. You should respect the resident alien. Don't mistreat a widow or an orphan because they're in need of your care, your goodness, your positive energy is what they need and what you should specifically give them. I so very much like this as an injunction to us to act in a positive fashion.
You know, I so appreciate those comments, Rabbi Ron. And it also makes me think about how, you know, the rabbis divided up the mitzvahs in different kinds of categories, but one of the ways they divided them up was what they called negative mitzvot and positive mitzvot. Mitzvot lo taseh and mitzvot aseh. In other words, the negative mitzvot were thou shalt not, and the positive mitzvot were thou shalt. So for example, in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit murder. Those are negative because you're being told what not to do. Whereas, let's say, keep the Shabbat or honor your father and mother. These are positive commandments because you're being told what to do. Rabbi Ron was quoting from a portion of this Torah portion that puts these commandments in the negative form. That is, do not oppress the stranger, right? And do not mistreat the widow and orphan. Elsewhere, we know it also says, elsewhere in the Torah, to actually love the stranger. So this mitzvah is so important that one can find negative commandments to avoid doing the wrong thing, as well as positive commandments to do the right thing. What are your thoughts, Rabbi?
That's very good. You know, I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. Ahavta recha kamocha. We're a positive commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're totally spot on. It's phrased, you can phrase this both in the negative and in the positive, but you get to the same place of what's expected of us.
Right. And then that would lead to various behaviors. And as Jewish citizens all over the world, what we've always hoped to bring in terms of the light into the darkness is to hope that our societies, and that's why you'll find activism in the Jewish community, both on the right and on the left, Jewish people who feel like we can make the world a better place by bringing Jewish values into law, because that's how change and an elevation of behavior happens. Shall I go into a couple of my own, or Rabbi, do you want to say a couple more things about that?
No, that's good. Let's hear your greatest hits.
We're going to move on. Okay. Well, I love yours. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I could have easily picked the ones that you chose there. So the next one we wanted to share thoughts with on you is do not carry false rumors and do not be a bad witness on the witness stand. These are related concepts because if we don't tell the truth, terrible things can happen. You can ruin a family, you can ruin a group of friends, you can ruin a community by carrying false rumors. But you can really disrupt society if you're untruthful in a court of law. So this idea of being very careful with what we say, that we don't pass rumors around, it's beyond just lying. It's really about spreading gossip, right? And also, of course, being conscientious and truthful if we're ever asked to testify against or for somebody else. Rabbi, do you want to respond to that before I go on to the next one?
To me, that thing about rumors, I think, okay, I'll make it an I statement. What a hard commandment to fulfill. Okay, I will own that gossip and rumor come too easily to the lips. And what a challenge it is to remind ourselves, is this necessary? Is it kind? Is it truthful? Does this need to be shared, or am I just sharing, lashon hara, that evil gossip? I think it's one of the harder commandments to fulfill because it's so easy to transgress on it.
Yes, I think the rabbis made that point that most people actually commit the sin of gossip almost on a daily basis, lashon hara. And so even though it's such an important mitzvah to avoid, people do it a lot, and yet one can still lessen in what they do if they're intentional and hopefully eradicate it. So the next one I want to share with you is fascinating because it's actually the textual source that shows the Jewish position on, or a Jewish position on, what is the definition of a fetus, which is such a hot topic right now in American culture as the Supreme Court is exploring what to do with Roe versus Wade and whether abortion rights are going to be restricted or not. So instead of just taking a position, here's the story. So the story is there are two guys who are fighting. This is in this Torah portion. One guy shoves the other guy. The guy goes flying into a woman who was pregnant. Unfortunately, she has a miscarriage. This is the one episode. We have a lot of infertility in the Torah. We don't have a lot of miscarriage in the Torah that we know of. I mean, it's implied in the infertility, but here she has a miscarriage. And the question becomes, is it a life that was lost? And the Torah concludes, no, there can be compensation, as if there was some sort of injury as opposed to, let's say, murder or manslaughter. And from this text, the rabbis will gather later that a fetus is not a life. And Jewish law will evolve from there. But then coming right out of that is the very, very famous Ein tachat ein, Shen tachat Shen, that an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life, and so on. And even though in the case of the miscarriage, it's not considered a life. And from this, you could go very literal and say, Judaism believes in the death penalty, not only in the death penalty for murder, but if someone accidentally or on purpose pokes your eye out, they get their eye poked out. If someone breaks your tooth, their tooth needs to be broken. And yet, according to the rabbis, this was never implemented. Do you want to say a word about that, Rabbi Ron, why it was not implemented?
Well, you'd have a lot of blind and broken people running around. Is the fiddler on the roof answer? But I think the reason they decided this was monetary damages, not physical damages. That there was to create an orderly society. I was fascinated by your comments on Exodus 23:1, though. One of my favorite authors, Chaim Potok, has a couple of rabbis in conversation. And one of them accuses the other of tampering with the very core of things. And his response is, those are the only things worth tampering with, so that our rabbis would be looking at that question of when does life begin? Totally fascinates me that what a basic issue, what a core issue, and they were unafraid to take it on and to look at it deeply and to put it into and to incorporate it into law. I mean, it's a beautiful teaching you did today. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yes, very interesting, and also on the issue of a life for a life, right? Because that's the one that really gets you. You know that they never poked eyes out and broke teeth, obviously, but the rabbis in the rabbinic period will later tell us, or they will decide that any court that would issue even infrequently a death penalty is an evil court. And from that, in the modern state of Israel, they do not have the death penalty. There's only, even for terrorists, a terrorist blows up a bus, they still don't give them the death penalty. They might get life imprisonment, but they don't believe in the death penalty. The only exception that has been made is for Nazis in the famous case of Eichmann, where they did give him the death penalty. But that exception makes a lot of sense, especially in light of yesterday's day. But the Jewish people, one could say, and Rabbi Ron, tell me if you agree with this. Do you think it's correct to say that the Jewish people are against the death penalty as a philosophical matter?
That's an interesting question. The Torah is full of capital crimes, things that deserve capital punishment. But the flip of that is, in case after case, you find that it was almost never implemented. I think that the idea that the punishment exists is there, but I don't think it's ever really implemented on a practical level. So I think you can defend that statement that the Jewish people don't believe in the death penalty.
Yeah, it's almost, I understand what you're saying. It's throughout the Torah, like, if this happens, let them be stoned to death.
Right.
And yet it seems to be the case that they never were. And it makes you wonder, was this a hyperbole that was used? Was it used as a threat? Don't do this terrible, don't disrespect your parents because you'll be stoned to death. Was it used as a threat, or was it used as hyperbole, or was it implemented in biblical times? If it was, we don't know of that. It would be a very literal reading of Torah, and we know that the rabbis will reject it outright later and in modern Judaism. Let me go on to the next category. And I told you that it was chock full of depth, this Torah portion. What we have in this Torah portion is an entire embodiment of what we'd call in modern society torts law. For anyone who studied Talmud, you'll find this in Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Batra. Torts law is, what we'd say in English, you say damages, another way of saying, a less fancy way, niziki, meaning what happens if somebody smashes your fence? What happens in biblical times if an ox, gourds your livestock and so forth? And then how does it compensate for? All of this is designed to create a society that will feel fair. Nobody wants to live in a society that feels unjust. And that's what so many of these laws are about. Rabbi Ron?
I think that key phrase there is creating a just society. You're going to be living in society in close quarters. What are they're trying to define, I think, what is my responsibility to you? What is your responsibility to our mutual neighbor? They're trying to figure these things out and have it be equitable all the way around. And again, I think, to me, Judaism emphasizes personal responsibility, that you are responsible for your actions. And I think a lot of these torts emphasize that if I dig a hole and I leave it exposed and your ox falls into it, I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for my actions. I think it's a consistent theme throughout Judaism. Right.
And speaking of oxen, I think that your next favorite has to do with ox, doesn't it?
It does.
What's with all this fuss about ox?
They didn't have Honda Civics back in the day, apparently, but I would go this way. Chapter 23:4, when you encounter your enemy's ox or donkey wandering, you must take it back. And you just referenced Talmud. Baba Metzia spends an awful lot of time about this idea about what do you do with a lost article. But let's take it one step further. Torah is telling us, even if that lost livestock belongs to somebody you hate, you have a responsibility to return it. You can't, that belonged to Charlie. I hate Charlie. I'm going to barbecue it. No, you're not permitted to do that. You have to return that livestock to its rightful owner. It is, again, an injunction to act in a positive fashion. I think it's to counteract some of our more negative nature that is giving us an encouragement to act in a positive way in the world.
Right. You have an enemy. It's interesting you put it in that term of someone that you hate. Yes, this would be someone you hate, but I think even more so, this is like your nemesis, it sounds like, right? Your actual enemy, someone who is the worst person in your life. And you see that their property is on the loose, meaning this would be a huge financial loss for them. And an average person, not even a bad person, an average person would be like, good. After what they did, they deserve this, right? The last thing, I'm not going to steal it, but I don't need to help them, right? That would be a very normal human reaction. And yet they're saying, even if it is the enemy, overcome, don't be in a vengeful place. Don't be in a spiteful place. What does that do to your neshama, your soul? If you're hoping terrible things will happen to anyone, even if it's your enemy, you shouldn't even be thinking about your enemy. Forget about him, right? And this idea that you would have to take a proactive step. We sang Oseh Shalom earlier, right? Imagine you show up at your enemy's house with the gift of having saved them a huge loss. That is the definition of making peace. And I find it to be this verse is one of the more powerful and idealistic assertions, I think, in the entire Torah, but particularly in this Torah portion. Don't you think, Rabbi?
Oh, very much so. But it's you used a nice word there, neshama. It's a chance to you enlarge your neshama by building a bridge to those who you hate. You're doing a good deed. So you have a chance to maybe build a bridge where one didn't exist before.
Yeah, you just made me think about, can you imagine if every person, like you took a day, let's say January 31st, and you said on that day, everyone in the world do something super kind for someone that you can't stand. Can you imagine the kind of seismic shift that would occur in the world?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it would be the most healing thing, wouldn't it?
You use the nice phrase, a seismic shift. It's just a basic change in how we think about the world or the world around us. It's absolutely a game changer.
Yes, I think so too. The last verse that we wanted to look at is very touching, I think, to us as rabbis, but I think would be to all of you as well. When our ancestors received the Torah at Mount Sinai, which also occurs in this Torah portion, I said a lot happens here, their response, and the neatest thing about this is apparently all 600,000 of us said it in one voice. And I say we because we always imagine that we ourselves stood at Mount Sinai. They were told the 10 Commandments, and then they said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We are going to do it, and then we'll listen. That's the literal translation. Another way people interpret it is, we will do and we will heed. We will do and we will understand. We will do and we will eventually get it. And it's kind of based on this idea that there may be certain commandments or rules that don't make a lot of sense or you don't feel like it. But if you do the mitzvah, you may understand it after the fact. You might not feel like giving tzedakah, but you give tzedakah and you go, You may not feel like saying a generous word to someone, even thank you. You don't feel like it, but you do it, and then you kind of get, oh yeah, that's why it's important, because it feels good afterward for you and the recipient of your mitzvah. Rabbi?
I find it one of the most exciting phrases, but also a puzzling one. I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to listen is puzzling. And I know you phrase that in several different ways, but it still comes down to you're going to act and then understand. You're going to act and then comprehend. It's a challenge, but let's go put it into our personal lives. How often do we do something just because we know the other person it'll make them happy? I don't always understand it, but it'll make them happy. And I think it's a good lesson to take to heart. Sometimes just do it because it's the right thing. Do it because it'll make the other one happy. You'll understand it better later on.
Very nice. I think you'd appreciate this as a sports fan, Rabbi Ron. I have a friend who loves football. I don't even know what's going on in football, but I looked up on the internet who's winning, who's losing. I'm like, how about those Rams? How about those, Buccaneers or whatever? And it makes my friend feel good because, I'm showing an interest, and I don't understand, honestly, but I do it.
Absolutely. Sometimes that's what a relationship is, right?
Yes, that's true. And I think it's about opening up your eyes and opening up your ears, seeing and listening. I'm going to quote from another religion. I think it was the Buddha, actually, that said that when we talk, we're telling something that we already know, but when we listen, we learn something new. Shema Yisrael. And we have this opening song that takes us into Shema Yisrael. as you lead us to your name, and we will know that you are one. Yes, we will know that you are one. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. 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 And for those of us who are more accustomed to the traditional melody, Rabbi Ron, will you lead us in the traditional Shema?
Of course. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one.
Amen. I often get asked about, should we say prayers for people who are sick? Is there a blessing for somebody who's sick? And I think it's important to say these blessings because it reminds those people who might be in the hospital, who might be out of sight, that they're not out of mind, that they matter to us, that we care about them, that we remember them. So we say the Mishaberach for those who are not feeling well. Maybe they're in their rooms, maybe they're in the hospital, but we want them to recover. We want them to feel better. We want them to know we're thinking about them.
Mishaberach Avotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, v'imotenu sarv karachav v'leah, hu yivarech v'rapeh, et kol hacholim b'keilah shelanu, the Los Angeles Jewish home. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, send your blessing of healing to all members of our community that are in need of healing, all of our residents that are in need of healing and their loved ones, all of our rehab patients that are in need of healing and their loved ones, all of our staff that is in need of healing and their loved ones, all of our volunteers and supporters that are in need of healing and their loved ones, and every one of them should have a refuah shlema, a complete healing, refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf, a healing of body and also of spirit, along with all others among the people of Israel and in our world that are struggling for wholeness. And we say together, Amen.
Amen. Refuah shlema.
It's our pleasure and honor now to offer a blessing to all members of our community. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.
May Adonai guard and protect you.
Yair Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka.
May Adonai turn his face to you.
Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'yasem lecha shalom.
May Adonai be gracious to us, and most importantly, send us all the blessings of peace.
Ken Yiratzon, may it be God's will. Amen.
Amen.
Let's sing a song about Shabbat. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorot ha'berit olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorot ha'berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorot ha'berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorot ha'berit olam. U'vayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat,
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. We love you.
When the sun has set on a Friday night, bringing peace into your home, families will gather all around singing Shabbat shalom. Everybody sing shalom, 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 shalom.